The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Well, good morning, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar on performance appraisals and management. My name is Cole Cummins. I'm the Loss Control Manager here at APEI. And before we get started on today's presentation, I want to go over a few housekeeping items and explain how to use the GoToWebinar controls. You should see a little control panel that has an orange arrow on it. If you click on that orange arrow, it'll open up a little question box for you to use. Throughout the presentation, go ahead and if you have any questions, type them in there, and we'll have a question and answer time at the end to go over all of those questions. And if we run out of time or get too many questions, we'll have those recorded. We'll have those questions recorded, so Carlene Mitchell or myself can reach back out to you for some for any help that you may need. So today's presentation is being led by APEI's Deputy Director, Carlene Mitchell, and Carlene handles all of our HR activities and the HR portion of our loss control department. And she provides assistance to APEI members with employee trainings, kind of like this one. She does policy review on any of your HR stuff and just answers general HR questions from APEI's members on a daily basis. So if you have any questions, not necessarily performance appraisal and management wise, but any HR questions, she's here and her phone is sitting right next to her desk, just not waiting for calls. She gets plenty of them, but she's available to help. So Carlene, I'll let you go ahead and get started.
Okay, thanks very much, Cole. And certainly let me know if we have any technical difficulties, if I need to stop and resume. So welcome everybody to the presentation here today regarding performance appraisals and management. This is a topic that I think causes most managers a lot of consternation. When I talk to managers, it seems like it's just all too common that the focus of employee performance management is really just the annual performance evaluation and appraisal process. So this often happens because managers, they lack the tools or resources or the training that they need to fully understand or implement a performance management plan for all of their staff. There really is a lot more to managing employees than just that once a year performance evaluation. Good performance management requires an ongoing process to provide regular feedback to employees so they know how they're doing and how they're coming along. If there's any deficiency in their performance, they're made aware of it right away so they have the opportunity to correct the shortcomings in their job performance. So today's training is going to be an overview of performance management and the performance appraisal process. So what I want to discuss with you guys today in this presentation is, first of all, we'll talk about the performance appraisal versus performance management. What is the difference between the two? We'll take a look at the performance management continuum, what's everything that's involved in performance management, how you should plan for performance appraisals, those dreaded evaluations that we have to do. How you can develop an ongoing performance communication plan for you and your staff. How you should go about setting goals and objectives for your employees and helping them set goals and objectives for themselves and their career plans going forward. And then we'll also take a look at the common rating scales that we see in performance evaluations, as well as really common rating perils that unfortunately managers sometimes fall into when doing performance evaluations. So let's go ahead and get started. So first of all, performance appraisal versus performance management. What's the difference? So when we look at a performance appraisal, it's really just a one-time event. It's that thing that we're doing usually once a year, where we sit down with the employee for an hour or so and talk about their performance over the previous review period, usually that 1 year period of time. In comparison, performance management is an ongoing process. It is something that happens every single day that the employee is at work, and as you are working with them on how they do their job and the performance expectations that you have for them in their position. A performance appraisal is retrospective. It's looking back over the performance period, and you're telling the employee, this is what you did and this is how you performed over the previous year. Where performance management is prospective. It looks forward. Again, it's that looking ahead, planning, and setting goals for the employee. Performance appraisals are short-term, sitting down and talking to the employee about how they did over the previous year and probably what you're looking forward to them doing over the coming year, as well as what their plans are for the coming year. We think of that 1 year period of time as short-term, whereas again, performance management is long-term. With performance management, you might be talking about with an employee about what their long-term goals are with their career. What are they looking at 2, 3, 5, even 10 years down the road? What would they hope to be doing? Performance appraisal tends to be correction-oriented. This is how you did. This is what I would like to see that you do differently going forward. Whereas performance management talks much more about progress steps. It's not all about correction, but making continuous progress in the job that the employee is doing or towards the upper level jobs if that is what their goal is. When we do a performance appraisal, we're completing a form. Most of our organizations have a set form with check boxes and spaces to fill in a little bit of narrative that you use to provide that performance appraisal. While performance management certainly requires documentation, it's not a prescribed form. This is going to be individualistic to each employee that you have, and you're writing out those plans and those goals for their position and their career goals going forward. So one is very short term, one time, the other one is going forward and longer term and really looking ahead for that employee. So that brings us then to the performance management continuum. So the performance management continuum is the different components that make up performance management in order to help the performance of our employees to keep moving forward. The goal is always to have your employees moving forward in their positions. So the performance management continuum begins with goal setting and planning, where you're identifying goals that the employee has and that you have for that particular position and how the employee can achieve them. So in order to achieve goals that you really need to set, you need to identify what they are, and you need to make clear plans on how the employee can meet those goals. The next step of the continuum is then performance planning. So as part of performance planning, you're setting benchmarks for setting goals and expectations. So if you set a longer term goal for the employee, what are the benchmarks along the way that show that they're making progress? And what are your expectations for the employee in making progress towards those goals? You really need to make those very clear and to communicate those to the employee. And it might be you're communicating them with them on a regular basis and checking in with them on how they're doing and how they're meeting those performance benchmarks and expectations that you have set. And then finally, the third part of the performance management continuum is the performance review. Now, when I say performance review, it's easy to think of that once a year annual review, but think outside the box with reviews. Depending upon the complexity of the job that the employee has, how new they are, if you have set them to tasks such as a longer term project, how often do you need to check in with them on how they are doing, review what they're doing, and provide feedback on how they are progressing, what additional help might they need, areas where they might be falling a little short, but areas also recognizing where they are doing really well. So taking the time to check in with the employee on their regular job as well as special projects, not just once a year, but on an ongoing basis as it is needed. So as we talked about, we started out talking about in this presentation is performance appraisals. And again, thinking outside of the box of just that once a year annual performance review, but any time that you need to sit and talk to an employee to appraise the work that they're doing, their job as a whole, a particular project, any goals that they are working towards, it really helps if you take the time to plan ahead for appraisals. And I know I was actually just talking with my husband last night. He was lamenting about having to do performance reviews for his employees. And I said, well, it happens to be I'm doing a presentation tomorrow morning on this very topic. And he said, maybe you should just write all my performance evaluations for me for all my employees. And you know, I'm certainly willing to help, but I definitely, having written a lot of performance evaluations in the past, recognize the challenges that he faces and that managers face in doing these. It's nerve-wracking, but helping planning ahead for appraisals will help you deliver an honest appraisal to the employee and be able to respond to any feedback they have in that process. So for starters, take the time to plan in advance. So one of the things about performance appraisals, as I mentioned, is delivering that information to the employee, because sometimes you know you're going to get a negative reaction to the employee. The employee is just as nervous about that performance appraisal as you are in giving it. So one of the things that you can do to help open up that conversation is talk to the employee about doing a self-appraisal. So this is where you can give the employee, say, 4 to 6 questions about their job, where they can provide feedback to you about the job that they have been doing. And this allows the employee to feel like they're gaining some degree of control with the appraisal process, and also it can help provide some direction for the conversation. These self-appraisals can also be really, really eye-opening for a manager, because the employee might identify their primary focus of their job, and you may suddenly see that it's very different than what you were hoping for. So it might open up some dialogue between you and your employee to help you direct them in a way that will help you both achieve more for what you need in their particular position. If you're going to have the employee do self-appraisals, think about asking that of the employee at least a couple of weeks in advance. At the very least, let the employee know that you're working on their performance appraisal and that when you anticipate delivering it to them, so they have some time to think ahead about it. When you are getting ready for performance appraisals, plan for open dialogue. The key word here is dialogue. It's all too easy to sit down with an employee, deliver their performance appraisal, read off what's in the evaluation form, and say thank you very much and have a good year. We'll talk again next year. Take the time to think about what type of questions that you can ask of the employee so you can elicit some insight into their job performance, how they think they're doing, what their personal goals are, what their objectives are. Give some good thought into making what you can do to make this an interactive dialogue with the employee, so you are both getting not only good information to help each other, but to also help you guys establish some goals and objectives for the coming review period. The next thing to do is to make sure you lay out a plan for the discussion that's going to take place. This means taking the time to collect and review notes from the performance period that you're reviewing, any type of statistics. So for example, if you've noticed you have an employee who has some problems with their attendance and punctuality, what are some statistics about their attendance and punctuality? Can you let them know how often they have been late and cite some specific examples? Provide them with some citations that give examples of their performance. This is not only just negative things, but of course take the time to identify those positive things. Go over that previous year and find those things that they have done really well and let the employee know, or over the review period. So take the time to find some very specific examples that help back up what information you're providing to the employee. Of course, when you're planning for appraisals, be sure you schedule enough time to be able to focus on that review and have a good discussion with the employee, so neither one of you feel rushed to blow through the process, and then there's that lack of communication that can occur. Continuing on, as another part of planning for an appraisal, take the time to be prepared to discuss a full range of issues that might come out of that performance management discussion. Consider the possible responses you might get from the employee. The other thing that I really, really stress is that be prepared to be honest with the employee. Here again is a peril that I see too many managers fall into. It's so hard to have a hard discussion with an employee about an aspect of their performance that is not as good. But if you take the time to plan ahead and plan to be honest, you're much more likely to be honest. Make your list of talking points that you need to go over with the employee. But again, always thinking about how they may respond to that feedback. And on that note, if you do get negative feedback from the employee, don't exhibit defensiveness. You have to be really honest with yourself. It could be that the criticism that you get from an employee might be justified because maybe you've fallen short in your management in helping the employee to meet the goals that you have set up for them, or that you have provided a lack of resources. It really is going to be helpful if you can be honest about this, acknowledge it, accept it, and then move on to the next area of review. If need be, tell the employee that you'll look into ways that you can assist them further and plan to get back to them on how you can help them further in the future. Okay? Of course, it should go without saying, respect the confidentiality of any performance review of the discussion whenever possible, and this should be possible most of the time. Occasionally, there might be another manager or somebody else in the organization that you need to apprise of the issues or challenges that an employee is having because they might be part of the solution. If you can't have unlimited confidentiality, if you can't promise it, make sure you let the employee know. Let them know that, you know, one of the resources that you have is another person, another manager that you need to talk to about helping the employee along with the areas where they are having some challenges, but limit that to on a need-to-know basis only. Really protect that confidentiality. Another no-brainer, I think, is no cell phones, emails, text messages, electronic devices, no interruptions. Really, really focus on that employee when you're doing their performance review. If you need to, stick a note on your office door that says, busy, please do not interrupt. Okay, silence phones, put your desk phone on do not disturb. Another thing I really, really recommend, in particular when you're doing the annual performance review, is take the time to yourself and also the employee review the job descriptions that belong to this employee. So this should really be a regular part of performance management. Job descriptions rarely stay stagnant throughout the employee's career with your organization. Technology changes, needs change, sometimes especially in smaller organizations, as some staff leave, duties shift in positions. Here at APEI, we have a very small staff, and as staffing has shifted, so have different duties for the staff within the organization. So job descriptions can change periodically. This is also another really great tool that you can use to guide performance review. Is if you go over the job duties an employee has and review them, think about what your expectations are for that particular job duty or essential job function. What are your expectations for completing that essential job function or duty? And have you communicated those expectations to the employee previously? If they're not meeting those expectations that you have, you need to be honest with yourself about how clear you have been with the employee about what your expectations are for those job duties. And here's where you can sit down with the employee, talk to them about reviewing their job duties, and ask them what their expectations are, what their understanding is regarding your expectations. And this might require a really honest discussion where you are saying, I don't feel that I have been entirely clear. Let's reset this and let's work on this going forward. That honesty, again, is really the best policy, and accepting your shortcomings where they may exist is really, really important to help employees to move forward. Okay, and then finally, handle dissent professionally. I mean, again, when you provide a less than favorable performance review, maybe it's somebody you have been working with for a while that you have been having ongoing challenges with, you may face this periodically. You're going to have people that are much more vocal and argumentative about the content of their evaluation. A really common thing that you can do is to state to the employee, if you disagree, you have the opportunity to write a rebuttal to your performance evaluation, or frankly to anything else in your personnel file, and we would be happy to attach that to your performance evaluation and include it in your personnel record as a matter of record to the file. But continuously documenting and being objective about the feedback that you're providing an employee is going to be really, really important. Anything that is in a performance evaluation, you want to be able to back it up. So be thinking about that as well as you're creating performance appraisals. So I already touched on this a little bit, but inevitably, there's going to come that day when you have to provide a more difficult performance appraisal. If you're providing a difficult performance appraisal, I advise highly against providing it to someone when you have never had a discussion with them before about the shortcomings or the challenges that you are seeing in their job. I always say that performance appraisals, the contents of them by and large, should not be a surprise. This should really be, when you're having this discussion, it's okay to have a recap of the issues that have been discussed in the past about their job performance. If there are more recent examples that have come up in the few days, perhaps, or week or so prior to the performance appraisal, then you can bring those up at the time. But be very cautious about citing specific observed examples. Don't beat a dead horse and spend time rehashing every issue you have had with the employee over the past year. More importantly, you could say, in addition to the issues we've discussed previously, I've recently noted the following examples of continued issues, and cite additional issues that you have observed that back up the previous examples that you have provided. When you're citing those specific examples, think about past incidences that occurred, specific examples of how they have not met goals or specific job duties, how their actions or behaviors might have impacted another employee or the work team or your customers or your department or your organization as a whole. If you can provide a clear example to the employee as to the impact on the organization, it's going to help it ring true. One of the things I always tell managers is when they are providing this more challenging feedback to an employee, I always tell them, don't focus on the ideas, feelings, or motivation behind the behavior. If the employee wants to tell you why something occurred, let them. But you should not be trying to identify why you think they acted in a particular way. Just simply focus on what occurred itself and the impact to your organization, your department, again, the team, an employee, a customer. Focus on that impact. So also think about soliciting constructive employee feedback on how you can help them resolve the performance failures or the issues that they are having. This often comes down to not only, of course, describing the specific examples where you have seen problems, but saying to the employee, what do you need from me to overcome this issue? Do you need coaching? Do you need me to bring it to your attention when I identify your communication is becoming negative? Do you need additional training? What additional assistance do you need from me? And then follow up on that assistance that they request as much as possible. So again, a key aspect of any type of appraisal or feedback is documentation. And with that documentation, set an action plan and think about milestones, the dates of when you will review this again, and what are specific examples of how you can measure success for meeting the milestones that you have set for them and the goals that you have set for the employee. How do you measure that? Okay, So for many managers, as I mentioned, that focus on that annual performance appraisal process has kept them from really thinking about developing a plan for ongoing performance communication. So how do you do that? Okay, so let's start with one consideration here. If you have not been providing regular communication and feedback to your employees, and suddenly you begin providing feedback to employees on an ongoing basis and very regularly, it sounds like a really great idea, but if your employees are not used to this regular feedback, this direct, immediate, and specific feedback about their job performance, you're going to catch some people off guard. This can happen in two ways. Either you've been managing for a while a particular group of people and you have fallen short in your performance management, or I also see this occur when you have a new manager come into a department and maybe the employees in that department have been managed by a supervisor who has not really been providing active feedback. Either way, if employees aren't used to getting regular feedback and suddenly they do, it's going to be a bit of a shock to their system and it can cause some real upheaval. So if you recognize that regular feedback has not been provided to employees in the past, either by you or a previous manager, it's really important to sit down and have a conversation with your employees to let them know what your plans are, what you are trying to do, and how you feel it will improve the workplace in general. So to let people know, you recognize that performance management is a continuing process, and it's going to assist everyone in enhancing performance and development in their jobs. So describe to them what it is that you are trying to accomplish, okay? Initially, like I said, it's going to be difficult, but hopefully in time with regular communication, employees will get more comfortable, they'll start to trust you more, and they'll get used to the process and getting that regular feedback. You're going to hear me talk about milestones a lot. Establish some milestone dates for periodic monitoring of performance objectives and progress reports, and always in objective terms. So again, dependent upon the complexity of a particular position, or if you have a group of employees who all do very similar work, the milestone dates that you set will really vary. If it's a more complex position, if it's a newer employee, you might be meeting with them weekly, or perhaps monthly is adequate. So if it's a special project, you might be having to catch up every day to talk about that particular project and the progress, and review the progress on that particular project. So the really important thing about establishing milestone dates is that when you set them, stick to them. If you tell your employees you're going to meet with them on a weekly basis, and next week you meet with them, and then you don't meet with them again for 3 more months, they're not going to take the process seriously. You're undermining yourself, and they're really not going to believe that you are serious about this performance management plan that you have been discussing. So really do your best to stick to those milestone dates where you're providing that communication and feedback. The other thing about when you set a performance communication plan is be thinking about any time that goals or objectives might need to be changed during a review period. Situations change all the time where in the workplace something comes up, you have an emergency, you have a sudden an employee go out because of a family emergency, you have one less person, and suddenly a program or a plan that you have set, it suddenly becomes a lot more challenging to meet the goals that you have set. So be aware that because we're not working in a really nice, neat world where everything happens exactly as we planned, that you might have to change up goals periodically, and that's okay. Write down what the changes are, document it, and set new plans for those milestones. Be sure that you always maintain open communication channels to make sure that as issues arise, they're dealt with quickly and resolved expeditiously. So again, I use the acronym DIS, direct, immediate, specific. It is absolutely the #1 thing I can recommend for managers, is that when you identify an issue as it arises, it's often, especially if it's a more challenging situation or it might be difficult to talk to the employee with, it is so tempting to put it on the back burner, to set it aside, to procrastinate. really think about the potential impact of ignoring that situation. While it might be difficult to deal with, it's going to be more difficult to deal with if you put it off until a later date. So whenever possible, try to deal with situations as quickly as you can to resolve them, and again, to get the process moving again forward, so people know what expectations are and you can stay focused on your goals and objectives. And finally, coaching. Make sure you explain to staff that if you're setting up a performance management plan, that you talk to staff about your management style. Again, if you're making changes, describe those changes, why they're important, what you hope to achieve with them. But one of the things I think that is really valuable is if you have especially if you have a new employee come into your organization, is to let them know right off the bat, my management style is to work with you and bring to you any feedback that I have for you right away. If I see any issues, any concerns, I'm going to come to you and talk to you about those right away, so you're not left floundering and making the same mistake over and over. When people understand that from the get-go with their job, it makes it much easier moving forward when you come to them and bring things to their attention. And again, it's a little bit startling at first, but as people get used to your management style and receiving that direct feedback right away with very specific examples, they'll become more and more comfortable with it. It's also, again, remind them, you're doing this in their best interest because it's your goal to help them meet their goals and be their personal best within their job. So as part of that performance management process, of course, we've talked a lot about this already, is setting goals and objectives. But there's some specific things you should take into consideration when you're setting those goals and objectives. So first of all, make sure you define and establish those specific goals and objectives for the review period. Again, the review period is not necessarily a year. Maybe this is next week or next month or within the quarter. Whatever the case may be, you might be giving someone an assignment that you want them to complete by 4 o'clock today. Specific goal and objectives for the review period. You might be providing them with feedback for a project that you're having them complete today. When you set those goals and objectives, make sure you set mutually agreed timelines on when you're going to provide progress reports on their goals and objectives. So mutually agreed upon. Think about this in terms of, you might have an idea of when you want somebody to complete a task, but they may have other things going on in the background that you're not thinking of that'll cause them to take longer to complete that task than you have set for them. So you need to get that feedback from them as to what is going to be realistic for them to meet that goal. Make sure you take the time to communicate any changes or redirections that you have for the goal or those objectives, and do this timely. If something has changed somewhere along the line that is going to have an impact on the goals or objectives of an employee's job, then you need to be sure that they understand what those changes are. Again, you don't want them floundering when they don't realize what changes are impacting what they're trying to accomplish. Whenever goals and objectives are being set, I always encourage people to use the SMART acronym: the specific, measurable, attainable, relevant, and time-based. Be truly specific about the goal or the objective that you have for the employee. Write it down, define it, make sure that they understand what it is. What is a measurable way that you can show that the employee has met that goal? How can they show they have achieved it and have been successful? How is it measurable? Is this goal or objective attainable? Really, is it realistic? Are they going to be able to meet this? You might initially set some goals and determine later on that maybe they are a little bit too lofty. Take it back a little bit. Keep an eye on it, monitor it, look at it during those review periods, during those milestones, and make sure what you have given them is attainable, or they're just going to get frustrated. Relevance, make sure it is relevant to their job. I call this the why. Whenever you are providing an employee with a directive, give them the why behind that directive. Why do you need them to do this? How is it impacting your organization, your department, their job? So identify for them the relevance of that goal or objective. And then certainly time-based. When do you expect them to have that goal completed? So on this particular note with goals and objectives, there's one little side note that I want to make. So we have seen, probably all of us in our careers, that individual who has come into a job at some point and they get good at their job and they stay in that job and they choose to stay in that job for their entire career. The example I like to use is that when I was 19 years old, I took a job with the state of Alaska as a records clerk. A couple months after I started, another guy was hired. His name was Charlie. He was 23 years old. He was a records clerk. We used to sit next to each other. And I held that job for about a year. And then I advanced to another position. And then I advanced to another position. And then I left the organization and continued on in my career elsewhere. Now, we're talking 30 years has gone by now. I'm sorry to say that my friend Charlie has since passed away, but he held the exact same records clerk position for 30 years. It was the job he chose to do. He was not interested in moving into any other position. He liked the simplicity of it. He was happy with where he was at. But as you can imagine, in 30 years of doing records clerk work, the technology did change. When I was there, we had these big honking microfiche machines. And by the time that after 30 years, everything was much more computer-based. So things really changed. So in a position like that, while it's fine for somebody to want to stay in the same position for years and years, one of the things you must remain cognizant of is technological changes in that position that may require additional training in order for the individual in that position to remain relevant. This is another area where I have seen, unfortunately, good employees who have been with an organization for years fall behind because they have not been brought up to speed on, for example, using Excel or Word or other Microsoft products or some type of accounting database or other technology that they need to know in order to continue doing their job effectively. So be aware of those employees who maybe want to stay right where they are, but don't lose sight of the training that they may need in order to remain relevant in their position. Okay, so setting goals and objectives, more things to consider. Align goals and objectives with your organization's business plan. Now, not every organization has a defined business plan or a department, but think about your department, your division, what it is you're trying to accomplish, and how would you identify the goals for your department? And when you're setting goals and objectives for an employee, how does it tie into that overall plan? Think about it's what I call the big picture. How is that goal going to serve the big picture for your employee, your department, and your entire organization? So again, that ties back to the why you're having somebody do something. Establish those mutually agreed upon goals between yourself and your employee. So again, think about what you would like, but what does the employee want as well? What do you need to keep your organization functioning, but also what does the employee want to accomplish as well? Okay. Excuse me. Be sure to recommend and recognize behaviors that are aligned with the organizational business plan. So as an example, say for example that you want to let an employee know that you have a monthly report that you would like to have on your desk by 4 o'clock on Friday. And it'd be great, you need it by that date, but it would be awesome if you could get that into me by noon because it would give you a little more time to work with that report. So likewise, if an employee, you've requested something from them by a certain date and they get it to you early, recognize that, acknowledge it, let them know, say, oh, I didn't need this until the end of the day, but here you've gotten it to me by midday, and I really appreciate that. What you're doing in that particular situation is you're making your expectations clear, but you're also throwing out an opportunity for the employee to excel, to do beyond what you have expected of them. Give them that extra opportunity. And when they do something that is above and beyond and you recognize it, you increase the chances of them repeating that behavior down the road. I always tell our managers, catch someone doing something good. And especially if you have other employees who overhear that positive feedback, it might encourage them to do the same thing as well. Once again, don't forget to establish those milestone review dates. Follow through those dates to ensure your credibility as a manager in stating, I'm going to provide you with feedback and doing it when you say you will. Okay, so next I want to talk about evaluation rating scales. So we're getting back to more of the performance review and when you're providing that feedback. So what we have here in front of us is excellent, good, acceptable, unsatisfactory. These are commonly used ratings that we give employees. Your organization might have a scale of 1 through 5 or 1 through 3 or some variation of this, but we'll use this as a good example. So we have these 4 ratings. But what do they mean? You know, if you ask different people what this means, they're probably all going to have different degrees of definitions for these terms. So whichever rating scale that you use, you really need to be clear to your employees on how you assess their employees' performance and assign the rating. Think about it when you're in school, you got a rating of or grades on an A, B, C, D, or F. And if you have a 1 through 5 scale on your performance evaluation, you can almost assuredly understand that employees will look at that same kind of rating. If they got a 5, meaning the highest level, then that equates to an A grade. And if they get less than that, you know, what does that mean? How are you rating them? So before you take the time to do an evaluation, talk to your employees about how you define each of the ratings on that evaluation form, and as it relates to their specific essential job functions and job duties, so they understand what it is that you're looking at, what you consider excellent, good, acceptable, or unsatisfactory for their position, so they have a fair opportunity to meet those expectations and get the evaluation rating that they are anticipating or that they feel they deserve. So let's look at each one of these and talk about how we would define these. So first of all, excellent. What is excellent? When we're looking at an employee who is considered excellent, that would usually mean that they're consistently exceeding their performance standards. Now, they're not just meeting them, but they're always just a step above of what is expected of them. They continuously contribute to the organization's success by adding significant value. So ask yourself, does completing the essential job functions to the minimum standard add significant value to your organization? Typically not. They're doing what you need them to do, but is it really adding significant value to your organization or your department? Resist the temptation to rate someone as excellent when they're just completing the basics. They're doing what you need them to do. Okay, we're looking for people who go a step beyond. Another example of excellent would be they demonstrate a comprehensive understanding of their work, and they take action to identify needs and solve problems. These are the people that they could probably train other people in their job and in their department. They are proactive. They identify things that need to be taken care of ahead of time. They might identify innovations that could be made to make processes work better and for your department to function better. So these people are always just a step above. Their customer service, their communication with others can be really excellent, and their attendance, their punctuality is always quite good. So overall, this is what you're looking at with excellent. And of course, I'll take a step back and state that you might have areas of somebody's job performance that is excellent and other areas that are falling below that. So think about the different areas and cumulatively how you feel they are doing. So what does good mean? This is probably where most of your employees will fall on a typical rating. They meet their performance standards. they're doing what it is that you need them to do. They're competently performing all the aspects of their jobs, and they're meeting all of the goals that you have for them. Another aspect of a really good employee, is that they are capably adjusting to any changing workplace needs and work requirements that you bring forth. So they're adjusting to those. Whereas in comparison, an excellent employee is probably going to be at the forefront of bringing about those workplace changes and needs. So it's really important to point out to employees, especially as a manager, that if you're making changes in your workplace and your employees get on board for that and are helping you meet those goals and bringing about those changes, anytime an employee is doing well with that, provide that positive feedback about how they're able to adjust to the changing workplace needs. That's an excellent point to make with your employees. So what is acceptable? So generally, in these cases, the manager might occasionally have to provide some regular feedback to keep the employee going or keeping them on track, some periodic coaching or reminders, or some type of prompts to help them meet the expectations that have been set for them. This is pretty typical of a new employee. This would be expected. But what about an employee who's been in their position already for a few years? Are you still having to help coach them along? They still get their job done, but you're having to provide them with some coaching on a pretty regular basis. They competently perform aspects of their essential job functions or the goals, but they're probably requiring some degree of assistance from you. There might be aspects of their job that require a performance improvement plan in order to concentrate on areas of weakness. So for a newer employee, like I said, this rating, it's honestly going to relay probably where they are and how they're coming along. But as long as you keep providing them with feedback about your expectations and the goals that you want them to meet, hopefully they'll continue moving along and improving in their position. Sometimes it just is a matter of providing the employee with some more resources, some more training, and more regular coaching to help them move up in their performance level. So identify when that is needed and document that and provide that regular coaching and identify for them when you see that improvement. And hopefully in time, they will be able to take on more with their job, work more autonomously, and need less feedback, less coaching or reminders to meet their essential job functions. And then finally, unsatisfactory. We typically define this when an employee, they're failing to perform most of the aspects of their position. They are falling behind in most areas. Their performance levels to some degree or other are below the expectations that you have set for the employee. And again, hopefully you have already discussed this with them ahead of time. So again, you're probably, with someone whose work performance is unsatisfactory, you're having to guide them pretty closely in performing just even their routine job duties. In a lot of situations, a performance improvement plan will probably, of some sort, will probably be required for this type of situation, with really regular progress reviews and very clear and objective statements about their areas of weakness and how they need to be addressed. So one thing to be aware of, if you have an employee that has unsatisfactory performance in some area of their job, but they're doing well in others, if you start to see them improve in the areas where they were unsatisfactory, keep an eye on those areas where they were doing well, because if those start dropping off, you may have an issue where you have addressed one issue, but now another one is building up as they are addressing the shortcomings on another area of their job. So keep an eye on the job performance overall. So I mentioned, of course, that we want to take a look at common rating perils. These are common perils that you will see. It's actually some of these apply not only to performance reviews, but also to doing job interviews. You might recognize some of these. But different mistakes that managers can make when they are providing a review to an employee. So the first one is the halo effect. And this is a situation where an individual's performance is completely appraised based on something that we perceive as managers as being a positive quality or a feature of this individual. One of the most common situations you see with this is that super nice person that works in your office. You just love them to death. They are so friendly every day, and they're wonderful in answering the phone and being so pleasant with customers. They bring the best food to the potluck, but they just aren't meeting the needs of the job that they are doing. They're falling short in a lot of the duties that they are doing. Another area where this can occur is you have someone who absolutely kills at doing their job duties. They've got their job down, they're great, but their communication and interactions with other people might be really, really tough. And we'll tend to focus on those positive things because we don't want to bring up the negative with the employee. Likewise, we have the horn effect. So this is similar to the halo effect, but the focus is on the negative aspects of the individual. So you give someone a negative review because of one or two negative things without focusing on the positive areas of their job performance. Again, your focus should be on the entire job performance for the entire review period and not just these few positive or few negative things. It needs to be a balanced review. Another rating peril is what is called central tendency. So this is where, especially if you have a group of employees who are all doing the same or similar work, you just don't provide much rating differentiation between the employees. You forget to focus on the individuals, and in trying to just be, even-handed to everybody, you miss out on praising those who are doing really well and perhaps providing some good feedback for performance improvement to that employee who really, really needs it. The next is leniency. This is the absolute #1 biggest mistake I see managers make in doing performance evaluations. It's when a manager avoids being honest because they avoid a conflict. They don't want to talk to the employee about the issues that they're seeing in their job performance. You see this a lot. I'm just going to give them a good rating because I just don't want to go into their attendance issues or performance issues or whatever the case may be. I'll just mark it good. Okay, this is a dangerous thing, and we'll talk about that in just a moment. Recency. So recency is when you focus all of the performance review on more recent events. If you're doing a review over the previous year and your focus is on things that just happened in the past month or two, you're missing out on a whole lot of feedback for that employee. So make sure whatever the review period is that you look at the entire period and not just what is in the forefront of your mind. A good way to avoid this is by making sure you keep notes throughout the review period about that individual's job performance in areas of concern and areas of really good performance, so you can bring everything up. Another peril is the similarity or like me rating. So this is when we rate employees favorably because they have similar values or interests as we do. And this is really easy to do. You've got that coworker that you love talking about knitting and your favorite TV shows on Netflix or the movies that you both really like. But that's all good and nice that you get along with this person on a personal level, but what is their job performance like? This is very similar to the halo effect of focusing on the good instead of looking objectively at the job performance. And then finally, the constancy. This is when we rate employees by their rank order. So you have that employee who's been there the longest, and then all the way down the line to the newest guy, and you tend to rate them based on their level of experience. Don't forget that you might have a brand new employee, but maybe they have taken on that job and learned it so quick and are really performing above and beyond what you would expect for someone who has only been in their position for a short time. Focus on the individual and the expectations that you have for that position based on not only how long that they have been there, but as well as their overall job performance in comparison to what you would expect normally for someone who's been there at that amount of time. Okay. Okay, so how do you avoid rating perils? So first of all, whenever you are providing feedback to an employee, make sure the statements that you make are objective, that you can back up any statements that you have with documentation or other data or information. I'm going to jump ahead to the point, make and keep adequate records with specific examples. These 2 points in particular, when you are telling someone that you're having problems or concerns about their job attendance, it's not really going to work to say to them, you're absent a lot, you're missing a lot of work, or you're late all the time. Be objective in your statements. You have over the past year, your absentee rate has been 15%. Out of X number of work days, you have missed this many. Keep specific examples in order to be objective in your statements. Consider the totality of the employee's performance. Again, think about not only their absenteeism, if that's been particularly bad, but are they getting all of their job duties done? Think about where they're falling short and the impact to the job that they're doing, or your department or the organization, and think about the totality of what they have done over that review period. You're going to get tired of hearing this. Establish those milestones for progress reviews, especially if you are providing negative feedback, setting milestones for when you are going to follow up with this employee to see how they have made progress towards the goals that you have set for them. Be sure to discuss specific performance issues and behaviors objectively. And this ties right back to that first bullet point and that third bullet point. Be fair with the employee about what you are stating to them, about what you have observed, focusing on the behavior itself and not why you think that they are behaving in that particular way. Another thing, and this one's super important, is be sure to consider any possible legal impacts when you provide an inflated performance rating. If you have an employee who's been performing poorly and you're too afraid to be honest with them and you give them a good performance review, and finally things to come to a head where you're ready to fire them, when all you have is a history of good performance reviews to back you up, it doesn't look real good. They may leave your organization feeling that they have been discriminated against or have a claim of wrongful termination. So it runs a real risk. Always maintain clear and open communication channels with your employees, direct, immediate, specific feedback, and be sure you avoid any kind of comments or connotations that can be perceived as discrimination. A good example would be, yeah, I know technology has changed a lot since you first started here because that was a long time ago. Or perhaps a comment about, maybe you're having trouble understanding me because English is your second language. These both have connotations of discrimination. And if you end up terminating an employee, it can lead to a tough situation. So in summary, be sure that anytime you provide a performance appraisal or performance management, that you understand the difference in what they are, what the form of them are, and the frequency of the occurrence for performance appraisal and performance management. Always understand it's really important to plan for performance appraisals and establish an appropriate environment for them. Don't allow interruptions, and be sure to be prepared to be honest and be objective in your feedback. Be sure you develop an ongoing performance communication plan for working with your employees by recognizing that performance management, it's a continuing process. It's something that has to happen day to day and not just a one-time annual event. Anytime you define or establish specific goals and objectives for the review period, make sure you use the SMART, specific, measurable, attainable, relevant, and time-based format for setting those goals and objectives. And also always keep in mind those rating perils to make sure that they are avoided. And I know I'm coming right up against the 1 hour mark if I haven't hit it already. So I am happy to answer any questions that anyone might have for me.
Well, thank you, Carlene. That's right on the money there. Great job. So we do want to open it for questions now. Remember, there's that control panel that has that orange arrow. If you click on that orange arrow, it'll open up that question box. Pretty simple. You just type in any questions you have and then just hit the enter key. Or if you have a specific question, Carlene has her phone number on there. If you'd rather give her a call, that's fine too. While we're waiting on some questions, I just want to let everyone know that this webinar was recorded. I'm going to put it on our website, akpei.com, this afternoon. You can find that under the education section under training videos. And while you're on the website, check out our new blog that we have up and running, weekly blog with different HR, safety, and risk management type blog entries, different articles and things like that. Also, we have all our past webinars on there as well under the training video section. So feel free to walk through those. I don't see any questions, Carlene. Just a couple of thank yous there. It is just about noon here. So like Carlene said earlier, if you have any questions, give her a shout, an email or a call, and she's happy to answer any questions you have. We'll be doing another webinar next month, and look for the invitation for that one. And Carlene, thank you for presenting today, and thank you everyone else for attending. And if you have any questions, reach out to us. Otherwise, we'll see you guys next month. All right, thanks for attending. Have a great day.